During my son's birthday party, my nephew grabbed my kid's present and yelled, "Mine." Everyone laughed as Dad said, "Don't make a fuss, it's only an iPhone." I hugged my child and said, "Okay." That night, I dangling her car keys and said, "Mine now. Relax, it's just a car I pay for." At my son's birthday party, my nephew grabbed my kid's gift before it even reached him and yelled, "Mine now." Like he'd won something, and the room cracked up laughing as if it were a joke everyone understood. Then my dad, without lifting his eyes, muttered, "Don't make a scene, it's just an iPhone." So I wrapped my arms around my boy and said, "Sure." And later that same night, standing in their driveway, I twirled my sister's car keys on my finger and said, "Mine now." And when she frowned, I told her to relax because it was just a car I paid for anyway. Earlier that day, my nephew had shredded the wrapping paper like a raccoon in a trash can, flipped open the box, and raised the phone over his head yelling, "Mine now," again while people laughed, and someone even clapped, and my kid, my son, stood there with frosting still on his lip, going quiet in that specific 7-year-old way where they're fighting tears, and my dad didn't even bother looking up from his paper plate when he repeated, "Don't make a scene, it's just an iPhone." So I hugged my kid again and said, "Sure," and he leaned into me heavy, like a backpack full of books at the end of a long day. Here's the thing though, I didn't yell, I didn't grab the box back, and I didn't give a lecture about respect at a table covered in Paw Patrol plates and Costco sushi. I just checked the time on my watch, 3:37 p.m., and clocked the little smirk on my sister Amber's face that told me this hadn't been an accident. Later that night in her driveway, I dangled her keys, said, "Mine now," and when she asked what my problem was, I told her to relax because it was just a car. Before I go any further, I should rewind a bit and explain who I am, because it matters. My name's Mike. I'm 36. I work as a project estimator for a commercial HVAC company in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I rent a 2-bedroom place for $1,280 a month, drive a black 2015 Camry with a dent by the rear wheel, and I've got a bad habit of checking my bank app before I fall asleep. I'm the quiet helper in the family, the guy who shows up early to set up chairs and stays late folding tables, the one who fronts the money just until Friday, the one who figures out the Venmo split when everyone else has had too much sangria to do basic math. The golden child is my sister Amber. She's 33, a single mom with big eyelashes and even bigger opinions. And if you need proof, here it is. When she rear-ended a mailbox in high school, my mom called it senioritis. But when I scraped the side mirror on my dad Ron's truck at 19, he took my car keys for a month because I didn't respect property. When Amber forgot to pay her utilities last year, Dad sent her $350 and a smile. But when I mentioned I was short on cash after my son's ER visit, my mom, Linda, told me I needed to budget better. This whole story comes down to one birthday party, one phone, one bill, and a boundary I should have drawn years ago. And yes, there's a receipt, so keep reading. The hook is simple. The phone went to the wrong kid, and everyone laughed like that was normal. We held the party at Sky Zone because my son Tyler is obsessed with trampolines and those bright orange socks. I put the deposit on my Discover card, $45.00 on April 28th at 9:12 a.m., and paid the remaining balance the morning of for $115.28 after tax. I ordered the sheet cake from Merritt's for $62.90, half chocolate, half vanilla, blue buttercream. And the receipt is still sitting in my glove box. I even picked up a Costco fruit tray for the health-conscious relatives who never actually show up. Amber said she'd help with decorations, which meant she arrived an hour late holding one helium balloon and a ring light, calling it content, while spinning in the doorway and telling me not to be weird about it. As for Tyler's mom, Rachel and I split up 3 years ago and keep things cordial. She was there beside me with napkins stuffed in her pocket and that tight co-parent smile. She chipped in by buying the paper goods and a Lego set that, honestly, never even got opened. I bought the main gift, not because an iPhone for a 7-year-old is normal, it isn't, but because Tyler walks to the bus stop from my place every other week, and he's been scared since a stray dog chased him. So we agreed on something basic, an iPhone SE 3rd Gen with 128 gigabytes for $129 before tax at the Apple Store in Woodland Hills. I picked it up at 11:06 a.m. Hid the bag under a blanket in my trunk, and felt a little proud, then grabbed a cheap case from Five Below with little planets on it, because my kid's into space. The family power dynamic filled the room the second we walked in. Amber floated around all charm and confidence while my mom managed everything like a PR agent, telling me, breathless while pinning up streamers, that Amber had a rough week and not to give her any tasks. And nobody mentioned that I'd had a rough month or that I'd covered Amber's $1,200 car insurance premium back in January when her policy lapsed, or that I was still paying $39.99 a month on my AT&T bill because I'd added an extra line for emergencies 2 years ago. Nobody said it because I'm the quiet helper, the guy who just handles it. 2 more examples, because they matter later. Last Thanksgiving, Amber collected cash for the shared grocery run. I handed her $120. She texted me a photo from Whole Foods showing 4 pies and 1 turkey breast with the caption, "You'll love it." And we ended up eating ham from my freezer. And in March, Dad forgot his wallet after dinner at Smoke when the check was $184.62. Everyone froze, and I slid my card into the leather folder while Dad patted my shoulder like I'd won something. So when it was time to open presents, I was tense but still hopeful. Tyler sat cross-legged on the foam floor with red cheeks and sweaty hair under a paper crown. He opened the Lego from his mom and squealed. Then Hot Wheels, socks, a hoodie, and finally the white Apple bag, which I pulled toward him and said was from Grandpa. And his eyes lit up like kids' eyes do when magic feels real and solid at the same time. That's when Amber's son Noah, who's 10 and has a talent for appearing whenever money's involved, swooped in, ripped the paper off, flipped the box, and shouted, "Mine now." And the laughter burst out around us while the party host laughed too before stopping when she saw my face. I told him calmly that it was for Tyler, but Amber was already filming because of course she was, and she said Noah needed it for school since his phone was broken and he was older, and I repeated that it was from me to my son. That's when Dad waved a plastic fork and said not to make a scene because it was just an iPhone, and Tyler stared down at his shoes as his paper crown slid sideways. Rachel squeezed my arm, and I nodded along like one of those dashboard bobbleheads, even though something in me had finally snapped. And in a voice that didn't even sound like it belonged to me, I said sure and stepped back, letting Noah clutch the box, and he hooped like he'd just scored a game-winning touchdown, while Amber stopped recording long enough to kiss his cheek and tell him to say thank you, and he tossed out, "Thanks, Uncle Mike," already tearing at the plastic like it was his birthright. From there it slid downhill fast, because that's always how it goes, and when the final bill landed, it landed squarely on me since the front desk already had my card, including the extra pizzas Amber added for still hungry kids at $45 a pop, 3 of them, 2 more pitchers of Sprite, a pile of socks nobody touched, and an event fee for a last-minute headcount change she texted in while I was wrangling toddlers, bringing the total to $1,187.36. And the teenager at the counter actually apologized while holding out the signature screen like it was a loaded weapon and asked if I wanted to split it. So I looked around the room at Linda doing her frozen smile, Ron counting leftover napkins, and Amber half-hugging Noah while filming again, and I said it was fine and even tipped 15% because I'm not heartless. Back home, Rachel helped Tyler put together the small Lego set, and he asked once where his phone was and then never brought it up again, which hurt more than anything else that night. At 8:52 p.m., my email chimed with an Apple ID notification saying my AT&T line had been activated on a new device, and I stared at it, breathing slow through my nose, until I saw the line nickname, Noah. Then I scrolled the receipt, checked the SIM details, and saw the activation time, 5:12 p.m. And instead of throwing my phone or driving back to Sky Zone ready to burn the place down, I took screenshots, 2 of them because the first clipped the IMEI, and saved them in a notes folder I labeled family. At 9:14 p.m., Amber texted me a video of Noah doing an unboxing with the caption, "You slayed, big bro," and I typed "We need to talk," erased it, looked at Tyler asleep on the couch with his hand wrapped around a Lego spaceman, and decided I was finished asking for basic decency like it was some kind of favor. Step 1 was small and kind of stupid, but it mattered because I opened my AT&T app and looked at the lines, me as primary, then secondary, then the spare I'd added for Amber during her temporary emergency 2 years ago that somehow never ended, and without hesitating I hit suspend line, confirmed I was sure, and at 9:22 p.m., Amber called demanding to know what I'd just done. telling me I was being dramatic and that no one needed the phone for school because he was in 4th grade, and I told her calmly to put it on her own plan, which earned me an annoyed huff and a comment about me getting weird before she hung up. 2 minutes later, I got an activation failed email, then another one saying the line was reactivated, which told me exactly what happened because she'd called Ron, and Ron had called AT&T like he was running the place, and they reversed it since I'd made him the account recovery contact years ago when I was working nights. So I fixed that too by removing him, adding Rachel because she's level-headed, changing the account passcode, and writing it down in a way only I could read. Step 2 was the money, because my Chase app shows those neat little spending piles that quietly judge your life. And when I tapped into May and scrolled transfers, I saw the Zelle for $800 to Ron on May 3rd for Noah's camp, and the $600 cash withdrawal on May 14th for Amber's car note. $1,400 in 1 month, which I added to the running tally in my notes and saw the total since January hit $7,500, all for temporary emergencies, staring back at me like a slow leak I'd ignored too long. And I wasn't looking for interest or praise, just maybe a thank you that didn't come with a winking emoji. Step 3 was proof, so I reopened the Apple receipt, zoomed the device details, saved it as something plain and boring like May 19th activation, then pulled the Sky Zone charge for $1,187. 36. The AT&T recovery contact changed timestamp 9:31 p.m. and a photo I'd taken without thinking earlier of Tyler's paper crown on the passenger seat with a smear of blue buttercream, timestamped 5:58 p.m. and dropped them all into one iCloud folder I sent to myself to print at FedEx in the morning, not for a courtroom, but for a living room. Step 4 was quiet, because I set the coffee maker for 6:10 a.m. Wrote field trip money $15 on the whiteboard by Tyler's backpack, packed his lunch with a ham sandwich, carrot sticks, and those yogurt tubes he loves. And when he mumbled awake at 6:42 asking if he could bring his Lego minifig to school, I told him pocket only because astronauts don't ride in backpacks, which made him grin. And Rachel caught my eye over his head with that look that said she knew I was holding something heavy. When Tyler went to brush his teeth, she asked what I was going to do, and I told her I was done being a resource and that I was going to show them the receipts, and she nodded and said to call if I needed her. I texted Linda asking for a family breakfast at our place at 9:30 and said I'd need 10 minutes, and she hearted it like it was sweet. At 9:12 a.m., I printed everything at FedEx on plain black and white letter paper because color costs 69 cents a page, and there's a difference between making a point and wasting money. And right at 9:30 they walked in, Ron in his OU hoodie, Linda carrying grapes, and Amber wearing sunglasses like the kitchen lights were paparazzi, announcing that this better not be an ambush. And I told her it was just breakfast while Rachel poured coffee and nobody touched the grapes. I set the stack of papers on the table and slid the first page to Ron because he treats everything like a meeting, and when he asked what it was, I told him it was the AT&T activation for the spare line named Noah, activated at 5:12 p.m. during Tyler's party, the line I'd been paying for. And he went still as the math caught up, while Amber scoffed that emails can be faked. So I slid over the Sky Zone receipt for $1,187. 36 posted at 6:05 p.m. and told them I was glad I paid for the party and wasn't mad about that part, but I wasn't paying for her line anymore. And when Linda sighed and started with Mike, honey, I raised my hand, calm and slow, and told them there was more as I slid the Zelle summary across the table. $7,500 since January, laid out clean with dates, amounts, and notes, followed by a screenshot of the bank alert from the night before that said my daily transfer limit was approaching, which is a dumb automated message, but looks official enough when it's printed. And Amber rolled her eyes and said, okay, so you helped, and we love you for that. And I told her you love my card, not me, which made her tilt her head with that thin smile and tell me not to be mean. I looked straight at Ron and reminded him that he told me not to make a scene, and I didn't. I was just setting a boundary, and he folded his arms and asked what boundary. So I told him the spare phone line was done as of now. No more transfers. No more being the card on file for group dinners. And if I'm invited out, I'll pay for myself and Tyler, and that's where it ends. Linda blinked and said I was overreacting, and Amber jumped in asking about the phone, saying it was already set up, Noah's contacts were in, school apps loaded, and I couldn't just do this. But she stopped talking when I slid the last page across the table, which was my car insurance proof of coverage listing a 2018 Hyundai Elantra titled in my name. Her car, the one I bought at CarMax in 2022 when her credit was wrecked and put under me so she could get to work, the one she promised to pay $250 a month on, and only paid once back in February before going quiet. Linda said my name slow and careful and asked what this was, and I set my keys on the table, including the second fob for the Elantra that I'd twirled the night before, and told them I wasn't taking her car. I was taking my car back until we had a written plan, because the insurance and registration were in my name, and if it stayed at her place, she needed to pay the insurance by the 30th, $126.18 a month, plus the last 3 months and June in advance, or the keys stayed with me. Amber's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as she said it wasn't fair, and I told her it wasn't punishment, it was a line, and Ron leaned back like he'd been hit with something embarrassing but survivable and said I was making my sister's life harder, and I told him she made my son's birthday harder, and I still didn't make a scene. I was making a plan. Nobody clapped, because real life doesn't do that. It just gets quiet and awkward, and Amber went straight to outrage, saying I couldn't hold her transportation hostage with her palm flat on my table like she owned it, and I told her it was my transportation she'd been driving, and she said she needed it for Noah, for school and practice and life. So I slid over the simple page I typed up at 8:05 that morning with 3 plain lines, $126.18 a month insurance due on the 1st, $200 a month toward the Elantra principal due on the 15th, Zelle or cash only. And if payment was 10 days late, the car stayed with me until the next month was covered, with dates and signature lines and nothing fancy. She laughed like I'd asked her to buy a planet, but Ron took the paper and read it slow, then surprised both Linda and me by saying it was reasonable, which sucked the air out of the kitchen because Linda hates when logic happens without her permission, and Amber shifted to guilt, saying Noah would be devastated and I was punishing a child, and I told her I wasn't punishing anyone. I was just done paying for her decisions. She tried threatening next, saying she could report the phone stolen, and I told her it was on my account so they'd be talking to me, and she huffed and looked to Linda, who switched to her soft voice and reminded me Amber had a hard year, that her ex left and rent went up and she was doing her best, and I told her I knew and that I help a lot, which was why I brought the numbers so we could actually see it. And when she said I didn't have to be petty with receipts, Rachel finally spoke up, quiet and steady, and said it wasn't petty to tell the truth, adding that Tyler handled yesterday better than any adult in the room and deserved the gift his dad bought him. Amber scoffed and made a crack about spare me the saint routine, and Rachel didn't blink, just said it wasn't an act, and I flipped the stack back to the first page and tapped the activation email and told them this was the only thing I cared about today. Either the phone came back or I got paid in full by Friday, because I was going to AT&T at lunch to move that line off my plan no matter what, and the car stayed with me until the insurance was current. Amber asked what happened if she didn't sign, and I told her the keys stayed here and pointed at the hook by the door under Tyler's backpack, where the Elantra fob sat heavy and ordinary, and the room went tinny like bad sound in a cheap speaker. She lifted her chin the way she does when she's about to lie, and I braced for it, expecting excuses and stories, but instead she went small and said fine, she'd just use Uber, and I told her to use Uber and save the receipts and we'd add them to the budget, which made Linda stand up and say enough and accuse me of punishing the family over a toy. And that's when I said the last line out loud. That yesterday at 4:37 my son looked at the floor and pretended not to cry, and it wasn't a toy, it was a moment, because he learned that someone can take his thing and the adults will laugh, and I won't let him learn that. The silence after that felt thick. Even the fridge seemed to pause, and Amber's face flickered not with regret, but calculation before she said I could have just told her I wanted it back and didn't have to be dramatic, and I exhaled and held my hand out and said keys. And when she didn't move, Ron reached into his hoodie and put them on the table himself like he was exhausted, telling her to sign the paper or start walking, and that, weirdly, was what did it, not my emails or numbers but him, saying it out loud, as she looked from me to the paper and back again. She finally scrawled her signature, not because she agreed with any of it, but because she wanted the whole performance to end, and she said, fine, you win, and I told her I didn't win, I just stopped playing. There were no fireworks or dramatic exits. It wrapped up the way real things usually do, with schedules and errands, because at 11:05 a.m. I was standing inside the AT&T on 41st while a guy in a blue polo asked how my day was going, and I said boundary day, which made him nod like he'd heard that exact phrase 100 times, and he moved the spare line off my account and onto a prepaid SIM he pulled from a drawer, then handed me a small white envelope and a printed summary that read account change completed at 11:22 a.m. with a reference number ending in 5942, which I slid neatly into my folder. At 12:08 p.m., I called Apple support because Amber had tried to report the iPhone lost or stolen and lock it remotely, and the rep asked for proof. So I emailed over the activation notice and the point-of-sale receipt from 11:06 a.m., the day before with the order number, and once they pulled the serial and cleared lost mode, I kept my voice even and left the call on speaker so Rachel could hear and silently remind me not to apologize for existing. At 1:40 p.m., I parked the Elantra in my assigned spot behind our building, printed a plain piece of paper that said not in use, do not tow, slid it onto the dash, and snapped a photo because Tulsa tow trucks don't wait for context. At 3:03 p.m., my phone buzzed with a Zelle alert from Amber for $126.18 with the memo insurance, and 10 minutes later another alert came in from Ron for $300 marked for Noah's Camp installment, and I didn't reply to either one. I just logged the numbers in my notes. At 4:10 p.m., Tyler spilled off the bus clutching a shoebox diorama of a space base, and when he spotted the small white box on the kitchen island, he bounced and asked if I got it back, and I told him I did, and that we'd set it up together and talk about rules. And when he asked if he could call Grandma, I said in a minute, because first we had to pick a ringtone, and he chose chimes because he said it sounded like a robot being polite. At 5:22 p.m., Amber texted saying she needed the car for Noah's practice, and I sent back a photo of the signed agreement and the $126.18 receipt and wrote that once June was paid she could pick it up, and when she said she needed it tonight, I didn't answer. Even after she called Rachel, called Ron who texted me a shrug emoji, and left a voice note that started with "Wow, Mike," and ended with "You're really doing this," which I saved to the family folder before turning on Do Not Disturb. At 7 p.m., Linda called, and I let it ring out. Then she texted saying I was taking things too far, and I replied that I wasn't available for that conversation and set the phone down. At 8:16 p.m., I sat on the couch with Tyler tucked against me while we picked out a blue silicone case on Amazon for $12.99 with Sunday delivery, saved his school numbers to favorites, and listened while he called Rachel from across the room and told her the phone sounded like the future, which made her cry and laugh and agree that it did. People always ask what happened next, so here's the practical fallout. The car stayed with me for 8 days, and on day 9 Amber showed up with $200 and a folded apology that wasn't really an apology. I handed over the keys and took a photo of the odometer, which we now do on the 1st of every month, something she hates and I no longer care about. The spare line is gone. The AT&T account lists only me and Rachel as contacts. Ron texted LOL okay once and never brought it up again. The iPhone stays at my place on my weeks, and on Rachel's weeks Tyler uses her old Android in kid mode, and he's perfectly fine because he's 7 and wants snacks and bedtime stories more than apps. I built a simple spreadsheet, not to punish anyone, but to strip the word help of its fog, listing every dollar from January forward and sharing it with Ron and Linda. And on June 30th at 10:02 a.m., Ron sent me $600 with a note that said we've been unfair, which made me realize I'd been holding my breath for about 10 years. The bigger change has been quieter, with the family group chat staying normal, fewer demands, more photos of my niece's art, and far fewer late-night "Nate, can you" messages, while my AT&T alerts are just mine now. Little pings when Tyler calls from Rachel's place to say goodnight and tell me about the planet he learned that day, which lately is Saturn because he likes the rings. Amber and I don't really hang out. We exchange logistics, and when she misses a payment the Elantra stays parked, which has happened once and lasted 3 days while she stayed mad and I stayed calm. 2 weekends after the party, we had Ron's birthday in the backyard with a grill and folding chairs. I brought ice and left my card at home, and when the cake came out Noah wandered over to Tyler and asked if he could hold his phone, and Tyler looked at me and I shrugged and told him it was his call, and Tyler smiled and said you can look at it, but not mine now, and Noah laughed for real and handed it back without a scene. Because kids adjust when adults stop bending the rules. Linda tried one more time by the hydrangeas, saying I embarrassed my sister, and I told her I stopped subsidizing her daughter, and those weren't the same thing. Then I took a photo of Ron with the grandkids, sent it to the group chat, and left early because Tyler was sticky and happy and exhausted. Back home, I filed the signed plan in a cheap Walgreens folder labeled car, stored the AT&T passcode in my lockbox with the lease and passports, replaced the Discover card that had been on file at Sky Zone, the bounce place, and smoked with a new one nobody else has, and didn't announce any of it because I didn't need to. There's no poetic moral here, just a practical one. I'm not a resource. I'm a person with a kid, a budget, and a spine, and I didn't yell or beg or threaten. I showed the receipts, set the terms, moved the keys to my hook, and learned the small trick I wish I'd known sooner, which is that you can't embarrass someone who isn't playing along.